The Great Flood, a disaster etched in humanity's memory. The waters are rising. We're rewinding time. Back to long before the foundations of civilization, towards the greatest catastrophe etched in humanity's memory. The world is submerged. The sky is furious. A desperate struggle for survival. And a single ship carries the fate of all mankind. Is this merely a legend, or an unforgettable truth of history? Silence, only the howling of the wind and the angry cries of waves echo. The sky has darkened, the earth is covered in water. One of the greatest disasters in human history reverberates through the depths of time, the Great Flood. This story is one of humanity's oldest memories. For thousands of years, it has been told across different cultures, passed down from generation to generation as a warning, a lesson, a reminder. However, one question is etched in our minds. Why are there such similar flood myths told in cultures all around the world? Is this merely a coincidence? Or are these stories echoes of a real event in humanity's collective memory? Is Noah's flood just a myth, or an indelible reality in human memory? The secrets of the past continue to live with us even today. We are embarking on a profound journey to discover the true story of Noah's flood and how this event left its mark on human history. This is not just the story of a disaster, but also of humanity's deepest fears and hopes. Follow us as we embark on a mysterious journey through history. The Noah's Flood podcast covers, in order, religious texts, mythology, scientific aspects of the flood, and conspiracy theories related to the flood. For the sake of comprehensiveness, we recommend watching the entire podcast, but if you prefer, you can also watch only the parts that interest you. Let's embark together on a journey into the mysterious world of history. Noah's flood in the Torah, Bible, and Quran. The flood is not merely a natural event, it's a disaster carrying profound meanings for humanity, a story of purification and rebirth. The Torah, Bible, and Quran narrate this great event in different languages, in different cultures, but with a common message: God's wrath and the herald of a new beginning. The sacred texts depict the period following humanity's creation as a dark era dominated by moral decay. Violence, injustice, and sin are ravaging the earth. It is at this very point that Noah is chosen to show humanity a new path, to call them to righteousness. He is God's messenger, a final warning for humanity, and the only hope for salvation from the approaching catastrophe. The world had strayed from its purpose of creation. Humanity had been caught in a whirlpool of selfishness and sin. Hearts had turned to stone. Justice had been trampled underfoot. Violence and hatred had spread everywhere. It was in this dark age that God sent a messenger to humanity, Noah. He was sent to tell people who worshipped false gods and were consumed by worldly pleasures about the existence of a single God and that obeying his commands was the only path to salvation. To awaken them from this moral collapse they had fallen into, to invite them to repentance and the right path. However, Noah's warnings were often ignored, made a mockery of. People did not want to believe that their accustomed world could change, that evil might one day be held accountable. Ears were deaf, hearts were locked. This was a challenge. God's command had been placed on the shoulders of one man, Noah. He was no longer just a warner. He was now a shipbuilder, driven by the unifying force of destiny. This enormous structure was becoming an object of ridicule. People thought he had lost his mind. But Noah did not stop. Every nail, every plank seemed to reflect his unshakable faith. This ship was not just a vessel. It was a shelter to protect from the approaching disaster, a capsule of hope for the future of humanity. Each plank was like a prayer, each nail like a supplication. Noah was holding tight to God's will. And that ship represented not just salvation, but a new beginning for humanity. But the real test had not yet begun. Noah's flood in the Torah, Bible, and Quran. The flood in the Torah, destruction and salvation. The flood narrative in the Torah is a story based on humanity's moral decline and God's decision to cleanse the world with a great flood. God directs Noah and his family to build a ship to save them from this disaster. Here are some verses about Noah's flood from the book of Genesis in the Torah. Genesis 6 verses 5-8. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Genesis 6 verses 13 to 14. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. Genesis 6 verses 17 to 18. I am going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens, every creature that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Genesis 7 verses 11 to 12. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, on that day all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. And rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Genesis 7 verses 17 to 19. For 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. Genesis 7 verses 23 to 24. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. People and animals and the creatures that move along the ground and the birds were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. Genesis 8 verse 1. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Genesis 8 verses 20 to 21. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures, as I have done. These sections of the Torah describe Noah's flood as a destruction followed by salvation. God's wrath nearly wipes out humanity entirely, but Noah and his family are saved through the ark and lay the foundations for a new beginning. The Torah, humanity's oldest holy book. The story of the first sins, the first regrets, and the first great covenants between God and man. And right in the middle of this story rises one of the most striking symbols of God's wrath and mercy, Noah's flood. After creation, humanity had strayed from God's commandments, taking a dark path. Evil was spreading like a plague. The earth was filled with violence and injustice. And God deeply regretted that the world he created had come to this state. But God had not yet completely lost hope in humanity. There was still an honest, faithful man in the world, Noah. God gave Noah the task of saving the world. He was to build a ship. But this was not just a ship. It was the symbol of God's covenant, his contract with humanity, the protection of life and the hope of rebirth. God commanded Noah, Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Genesis 6 verses 13 to 18. And as promised, the flood began. For 40 days and 40 nights, rains beat down upon the earth. The waters rose, and the world was completely submerged. Humanity paid the heaviest price for its sins. But God's Ark of the Covenant was safe. Noah, his family, and the animals in the ark survived the flood. This was not just a salvation. It was also a new beginning for humanity. The world would be rebuilt with Noah and his descendants. When the flood ended, God made a promise to Noah and humanity. Never again will there be a flood to destroy all life on earth. The rainbow continued to shine in the sky as a symbol of this covenant. The story of Noah's flood in the Torah teaches humanity an important lesson. The price of sins can be heavy, but God's mercy always offers forgiveness and a new beginning. After every destruction, a new hope is born. This is God's second chance offered to the earth, and a reminder of his infinite mercy to humanity. The flood is not just a punishment, a destruction. It is also a symbol of purification and rebirth. A beginning where evil is erased and the world is renewed. Noah's Ark is not just a symbol of salvation, it also carries the seeds of life necessary for humanity and all life to sprout anew. The Ark became a sanctuary where life was secured in the midst of the greatest disaster in human history. Inside it was the future of humanity and nature. Animals were taken into the ark in pairs. Plant seeds waited for the day when the soil would green again. This was not just a salvation, but also a preparation for life to bloom again. The flood was the end of an era. But every end heralds a new beginning. The ark carried not only Noah and his family, but everything necessary for life to continue. The seeds of life were a ray of hope for humanity once again. And when the flood ended, when the ark ran aground, life took root in the soil once more. This is not just a rebirth, but also humanity's second chance. A world purified by the flood came back to life with the seeds of life. The flood in the Bible: sin, punishment, and redemption. Verses about the flood in the Bible, New Testament. Matthew 24, verses 37 to 39. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Luke 17, verses 26 to 27. Just as it was in the days of Noah, so also will it be in the days of the Son of Man. People were eating, drinking, marrying and being given in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark. Then the flood came and destroyed them all. Hebrews 11, verse 7. By faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. 1 Peter 3, verse 20. To those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. In it only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. These passages are references to Noah's flood in the New Testament and connect the flood to themes such as faith and salvation. The detailed flood narrative in the Torah is found in the book of Genesis. A second chance, rebirth after the flood. This wasn't just about rising waters. It was also a consequence of humanity's sins, mistakes, and estrangement from God. The world, tainted by Adam's original sin, was being cleansed once again. However, this was not an end, but a new beginning. Even in his anger towards humanity, God did not withhold his mercy. He protected Noah and those who believed with him to establish a new world. The post-flood world was like a blank canvas. Humanity, purified from the sins of the past, had found an opportunity to start anew with a clean slate. This was a testament to God's forgiveness and faith in humanity. In Christianity, the flood is also identified with the ritual of baptism. Immersion in water symbolically represents purification from past sins and rebirth. Just as the floodwaters cleansed the old world, baptism cleanses the soul, preparing it for God's love. There's an important point that the Bible emphasizes in this parallel between baptism and the flood. No matter how dark the past may be, there is always a chance to start anew thanks to God's mercy and forgiveness. What matters is to seize this chance and walk towards God's light. The Quran, a holy guide illuminating the path of humanity. The struggles of the prophets, the manifestation of divine justice, and warnings against disbelievers echo through its pages. One of the most striking of these warnings is the story of Noah and his people. Noah called his people to believe in the one Allah. 4 years, patiently, despite all kinds of difficulties, he tried to make his voice heard. But his people clung tightly to their idols. Moral corruption, injustice, and perversion had engulfed everything. They closed their ears to Noah's call and hardened their hearts. In the Quran, Noah's flood is not just a natural event, but a divine punishment, a warning. The disbelievers, the oppressors, and those who succumb to evil face this flood. Allah's justice manifests in this world and the hereafter. And this time, a great disaster was approaching that would result in the triumph of faith. However, when the flood began, one of Noah's family, one of his sons, refused to board the ark. "I will take refuge on a mountain to protect me from the water," he said. But on that day, no power could provide escape from Allah's command. This scene gives an important lesson to humans in the Quran. Faith must live not only in words, but in the heart and in actions. And each individual is responsible for their own faith. No one can change another's fate. Even Noah's son could only be saved through his own faith, not because of his father's prophethood. But he rejected faith and his end was destruction. In the Quran, Noah's flood tells of the triumph of faith and divine justice. While the disbelievers drowned in the water, the believers in God's chosen prophet were saved in the ark, a symbol of a new beginning. This story gives humanity a lesson: to resist evil, to walk in the light of faith, and to never forget divine justice. And after the flood, the earth was reshaped. God offered a new hope to the believers. The flood was not just a punishment, but also a rebirth for humanity. This story is not just a disaster that happened in the past, but an echo of humanity's deepest fears and hopes. For believers, the flood is not the end, but a new beginning. 3 Abrahamic religions: the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran. Each contains sacred teachings about human history, and each narrates the same great catastrophe, Noah's flood. However, this story appears in each religious text with different language but common messages. The Torah and the Bible describe the flood as a consequence of God's wrath against humanity's wickedness. According to the book of Genesis, the world was filled with evil, and God decided to end this wickedness. But Noah, being a righteous and faithful man, found favor in God's eyes. God commanded him to build a great ship. This vessel was the means of salvation for Noah, his family, and animals of every kind to start a new life. In the Bible, the flood is also described as God's anger towards humanity and atonement for sins. Humanity was tested once again, but given a chance to cleanse itself of sins. This flood symbolizes moral cleansing and a new beginning in the Bible. The Quran, on the other hand, emphasizes the flood as Allah's justice and wrath against disbelievers. In the Quran, Noah calls his people to believe in Allah for years, trying to save them from idolatry and moral corruption. However, his people reject and mock his words. Allah sends the flood as a warning to non-believers, and only Noah and those who believe in him are saved. The flood stories in the Torah, Bible, and Quran point to a common theme: the manifestation of divine justice in the face of evil and the salvation of believers. All 3 sacred texts convey the same message: God's wrath can be great, but salvation is possible through faith and patience. The flood is not just a physical disaster, but also a moral warning. It's a story of purification and rebirth for humanity. In all 3 religions, the flood serves as a symbol of divine justice and mercy. God always gives humans a second chance, but this chance is only for those who have faith. The flood described in sacred texts is one of humanity's oldest memories. Although narrated in different languages and cultures, they all share something in common: God's justice and the hope of rebirth. Noah's flood, as told in the Torah, Bible, and Quran, appears in the sacred books of all 3 Abrahamic religions as one of humanity's common myths. The flood narratives of these 3 religions, with some similarities and differences, contain profound messages about the fate of humanity. Similar aspects: God's wrath and human corruption. In all 3 sacred texts, the flood is presented as a punishment from God for humanity's moral decline. In the Torah and Bible, humans have turned to evil, violence, and sin, causing God to decide to destroy the earth. Similarly, in the Quran, Noah's people have sunk into idolatry and immorality, deserving a great divine punishment by rejecting Noah's calls. Noah's chosen status. In all narratives, Noah is chosen by God as an honest and faithful servant. He is the prophet who carries out God's commands, calls his people to the right path, and builds a great ship to be protected from God's disaster. The Ark and Salvation. In all 3 books, Noah, his family, and a certain number of animals are protected from the flood by entering the Ark. The Ark is emphasized as a symbol of protection from God's wrath and salvation for believers. Duration and scale of the flood. There are similarities in the duration and intensity of the flood. While the Torah and Bible state that the flood lasted 40 days and 40 nights, the Quran doesn't specify this duration but emphasizes the flood's scope and destructiveness. In both accounts, waters cover the earth and destroy life. New beginning and covenant. In the Torah and Bible, after the flood, God makes a covenant with Noah and his descendants, promising never to destroy the earth with such a disaster again. In the Quran, it is emphasized that among those saved from the flood were Noah's family and those who believed in him, and that Allah showed them mercy. Different aspects. The primary cause of the flood. In the Torah and Bible, the cause of the flood is humanity's general moral decline and rebellion against God. In the Quran, the reason for the flood is more focused on the people's idolatry and rejection of Noah's warnings. Noah's son and family. In the Quran, it's narrated that Noah's son refused to board the ark and drowned in the flood. This points to individual responsibility for faith, independent even of one's family. In the Torah and Bible, Noah's sons are among those who board the ark and are shown among the survivors. God's covenant and the rainbow. In the Torah and Bible, When the flood ends, God makes a covenant with Noah and his descendants, promising never to destroy the world with such a disaster again. The rainbow appears as a symbol of this covenant. The Quran doesn't include such a detail, instead emphasizing divine mercy and Noah's salvation. Universality and repetition of the message. In the Quran, the flood is portrayed as a specific punishment for Noah's people, while in the Torah and Bible, it's described as a universal event. The Torah and Bible state that everything on earth was destroyed, and all living beings except Noah and those in the ark were eliminated. The Quran, however, emphasizes Noah's disbelieving people more, and doesn't clearly state that the entire world was destroyed. The flood in Mesopotamian tablets. Gods, kings, and the Great Deluge. Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. In these lands where history, mythology, and belief intertwine, we find humanity's oldest written records. The flood story inscribed in these lands shows us a different face of Noah's flood. The flood in Sumerian mythology, the Epic of Gilgamesh and the quest for immortality. Sumerian mythology narrates the flood story through the fragile relationship between humans and gods. Initially, the gods created humans for their own service. However, as humans multiplied over time, their noise began to disturb the gods' peace. With population growth, cities expanded, and human voices became a source of irritation for the gods. According to Sumerian tablets, the gods gathered and decided to destroy humanity. However, this decision was not unanimously accepted. There were gods who pitied humanity and wanted to save them. Ziusudra, the wise and pious king of Shuruppak, was warned by the god Enki. Enki informed Ziusudra of the approaching disaster through a dream and told him to build a ship. This ship would protect not only Ziusudra and his family, but also animals and plant seeds. Ziusudra obeyed the god's command. He built an enormous ship and gathered all living creatures inside. A storm and flood lasting for days began. While cities were submerged, only Ziusudra's ship remained above the waters. When the flood ended, Ziusudra's ship came to rest on Mount Nazur. Ziusudra, the survivor, offered sacrifices to show his gratitude to the gods. In return for this loyalty, the gods granted Ziusudra immortality. As the sole survivor of the flood, Ziusudra became a symbol of humanity's rebirth. The Sumerian flood story is not just a narrative of a disaster, but also a symbol of humanity's rebirth. While humans were on the brink of destruction by the gods' wrath, survivors, thanks to wise leaders like Ziusudra, ushered in the beginning of a new era. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the flood story takes on a different dimension. Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, faces the death of his friend Enkidu and sets out in search of immortality. In this quest, he encounters Ziusudra, Utnapishtim in Akkadian mythology, who survived the flood. Gilgamesh tries to learn the secret of immortality from Ziusudra. However, Ziusudra tells him that immortality is not given to ordinary mortals. Gilgamesh returns empty-handed from this journey but learns an important lesson. True immortality lies not in earthly life but in good deeds and the legacy left behind. The Sumerian flood narrative deals with themes of human mortality, complex relationships with gods, and moral responsibility. The flood is seen not as a punishment but as an opportunity for rebirth, a process of purification. And this ancient story continues to question humanity's universal quest and the meaning of life. The flood in Akkadian mythology, the Epic of Atrahasis and the conflict of gods. In Akkadian mythology, the flood emerges as a result of the complex relationship between humanity and the gods. This story is told in the Epic of Atrahasis, which is based on Sumerian mythology and has a similar structure. The epic deals with the fragile balance between gods and humans, the wrath of the gods, and the resulting great flood. Gods and humans, a story of a fragile balance. According to Akkadian mythology, humans were created to serve the gods. Humans were thought of as beings who provided food for the gods, worked in temples, and attended to the gods' needs. However, over time, the human population begins to increase, leading to a problem. The excess number of humans and the noise and chaos brought by their lives begin to disturb the gods. The gods become uncomfortable due to this unrest caused by humans. The wrath of Enlil. Among the gods, especially the god Enlil takes a harsh stance against humans. Enlil cannot tolerate the chaos and noise caused by humans as their numbers increase. Enlil considers destroying humanity to find a solution to this situation. However, other gods are hesitant in the face of such a harsh decision. Still, Enlil's wrath prevails, and a flood is planned to punish humans. Enlil argues that humans need to be destroyed and wants to eliminate them through the flood. Ea's intervention. However, among the gods, there is one who is more merciful to humans, the god of wisdom, Enki. Ea opposes the complete destruction of humans. As the god of wisdom and mercy, Ea pities humans and seeks a way to save them. Although he cannot completely thwart Enlil's plans, Ea chooses to secretly warn humans before the flood. With his love and compassion for humans, Ea tries to give humanity a chance for salvation. Ea approaches Atrahasis, the wise leader of the city of Shuruppak, and informs him about the approaching flood. He commands him to build a large ship and ensures his survival by taking his family along with various animals and craftsmen onto the ship. Thus, while mitigating Enlil's wrath, Ea also prevents the complete destruction of humanity. Atrahasis' salvation and the flood. Atrahasis builds a large ship following Ea's instructions. When the flood begins, he ensures salvation by taking his family, animals, and craftsmen onto his ship. The flood lasts for days, destroying cities and people. However, Atrahasis and those on his ship survive. When the waters recede, the ship settles at a safe point, and Atrahasis offers his salvation to the gods. Although the Epic of Atrahasis originates from Sumerian mythology, in the Akkadian version, the conflicts between gods and the struggle of divine powers influencing human fate are more prominent. This story presents a disaster narrative where humanity comes to the brink of destruction, but wisdom and compassion can overcome wrath and destruction. This fragile relationship between gods and humans shows the limits of the gods' influence over humans despite their absolute powers and their moral responsibilities. The Epic of Atrahasis, within flood mythology, contains universal themes such as the balance of power among gods, mercy, and justice. The flood in Mesopotamia and holy books. Search for a common source. The written flood narratives of ancient Mesopotamian civilizations such as Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian show striking similarities with the Noah's flood narratives in the Torah and Quran. These parallels have led to many discussions about whether these narratives derive from a common source or are cultural elements influenced by each other. Now let's focus on the similarities and differences by examining the Mesopotamian flood myths and the flood stories in the Torah and Quran. Mesopotamian flood myths. The epics of Gilgamesh and Atrahasis. One of the oldest flood narratives in Mesopotamia appears in the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh and the Akkadian epic of Atrahasis. In Sumerian mythology, the flood narrative begins with the story of the wise king named Ziusidra. The gods decide to destroy humanity because they are disturbed by the increasing number of humans and the noise they create. However, the god of wisdom Enki, Ea in Akkadian mythology, informs Ziusidra and Atrahasis in the Akkadian version about the flood through a dream. Enki tells him to build a ship and take his family, animals, and seeds into it. When the flood begins, everything is submerged. However, Ziusidra and the living beings on his ship survive. After the flood, Ziusidra offers a sacrifice to the gods, and the gods grant him immortality. In the Akkadian version, the Epic of Atrahasis describes a situation where humanity was initially created for the gods, but as they multiplied, the gods began to feel disturbed. While the god Enlil decides to destroy humans with a flood, the god of wisdom Ea intervenes again and instructs Atrahasis to build a ship. Atrahasis, taking his family, animals, and craftsmen onto the ship, survives the flood. The flood in the Torah, the Book of Genesis. The flood story told in the Book of Genesis in the Torah bears significant similarities to Mesopotamian narratives. According to the Torah, God becomes disturbed by the wickedness of humans and decides to destroy them. However, he chooses a righteous man named Noah and commands him to build an ark. Noah boards the ark with his family and a pair of every kind of animal. When the flood begins, it rains for 40 days and 40 nights, and the whole world is submerged. However, Noah and the living beings on the ark survive. After the waters recede, Noah leaves the ark and offers a thanksgiving sacrifice to God. God makes a covenant with Noah and promises that such a disaster will never occur again. The flood in the Quran, divine justice. The story of Noah's flood in the Quran shows a similar structure to the Torah and Mesopotamian myths, but it contains some distinct differences. According to the Quran, Prophet Noah calls his people to believe in Allah and stay away from idolatry, but his people reject this call. Allah commands Noah to build a ship and take his family, the believers, and animals onto it. When the flood begins, water gushes from underground springs and destroys his people. Noah's Ark safely settles on the mountains. A detail emphasized in the Quran is that Noah's son and wife refused to board the ark and drown in the flood. In the Quran, God's mercy and justice are at the forefront, and the flood only targets the disbelievers. Similarities. Divine punishment. In all three texts, the flood appears as a divine punishment. Gods or God have become disturbed by humanity's sins, wickedness, or noise and decided to send a disaster. A savior. Both in Mesopotamian myths and in the Torah and Quran, God or gods warn a pious and wise person before the flood. In Sumerian mythology, this is Ayusadra, in Akkadian, Atrahasis, and in the Torah and Quran, Noah. Ship and salvation. In all these narratives, the chosen person builds a ship and saves his family and animals from the flood. The living beings on the ship become a symbol of a new beginning with the end of the flood. Sacrifice after the flood. Both in Mesopotamian myths and in the Torah and Quran, a thanksgiving sacrifice is offered to the gods or God after the flood. This stands out as a symbol of a new beginning and peace. Covenant after the flood. In the Torah and Quran, a covenant is made between God and the survivors after the flood. In the Torah, this covenant includes God's promise never to destroy the earth with a flood again. Differences. Reasons. In Mesopotamian myths, the flood stems from the noise of humans and the gods' disturbance, while in the Torah and Quran, the moral corruption and sins of humans are at the forefront. Theology. Mesopotamian myths have a polytheistic belief system. Disagreements, conflicts of interest, and different attitudes among the gods are notable. While Enlil plans to destroy, Ea tries to save humans. In the Torah and Quran, the flood is sent by a single god, and God's will is determinant in all events. Noah's family and those on the ark. In the Quran, Noah's son and wife's refusal to board the ark and their destruction is notable. This detail is not found in the Torah and is not present in Mesopotamian myths. The Quran emphasizes personal responsibility and the importance of faith. Search for a common source. These parallels raise the question of whether the flood stories are a result of cultural interaction from Mesopotamia to the Torah and then to the Quran, or if they are independent narratives based on a common human memory. Considering that Sumerian and Akkadian civilizations were the most powerful cultural and economic centers of the region in the 3rd millennium BC, it can be thought that Mesopotamian flood myths influenced the Torah and consequently the Quran. However, it is debatable whether these narratives developed through common mythological themes of humanity or reflect a historical disaster. These similarities between the flood narratives in Mesopotamia and the holy books can be evaluated as different cultural interpretations of a common mythological source or a regional disaster. The flood in world mythologies, a cultural journey of a myth. Flood stories are not unique to the Middle East. Around the world, this narrative of great catastrophe has been interpreted in different ways across various cultures. Each society has shaped the flood according to its own beliefs and worldviews. The flood in Greek mythology, Zeus's wrath and a new beginning. In Greek mythology, the flood is a consequence of humanity's disrespect towards the gods and moral decay. In the Late Bronze Age, people had begun to lead lives full of greed, selfishness, and violence. They had forgotten the gods and pursued their own desires. This decline of humanity brings the wrath of Zeus, king of the gods, to its peak. He holds a meeting with other gods, and a decision is made to destroy humanity. However, Deucalion, son of Prometheus, and his wife Pyrrha are honest and pious people. They have never lost their devotion to the gods. Prometheus takes pity on his son and warns him of the impending disaster. He advises Deucalion and Pyrrha to build an ark and fill it with food, clothing, and animals. With Zeus's anger, a massive storm breaks out from the sky. Rain falls incessantly for days, rivers overflow, and the earth is submerged underwater. After this 9-day flood, the waters gradually recede. Deucalion and Pyrrha's ark comes to rest on the peak of Mount Parnassus. Deucalion and Pyrrha are the only surviving humans on Earth. They pray to the goddess Themis, asking how to recreate humanity. Themis tells them, "Throw behind you the bones of the mother who is the earth, that is, stones over your shoulders." From the stones thrown by Deucalion, men are formed, and from those thrown by Pyrrha, women are created. Thus, humanity is reborn. The Greek flood story symbolizes the destruction and rebirth of humanity. It reminds us of the wrath of the gods, human weakness, and moral responsibilities. This story emphasizes that humankind should learn from past mistakes and strive for a better future. A new beginning is always possible. The flood in Hindu mythology, Manu and Matsya avatar. Matsya informs Manu that a great flood is approaching and will submerge the entire world. He tells him to build a ship and to take his family, 7 wise people, rishis, various species of living creatures, and sacred scriptures on this ship. When the flood begins, as giant waves swallow the earth, Matsya pulls the ship safely towards the great mountain. The flood lasts for days, but Manu is safe thanks to Matsya. Vishnu brings peace to earth to re-establish Dharma by saving the universe. When the flood ends, the waters recede and Manu's ship rests on the mountaintop. This flood symbolizes not only a disaster but also a new beginning. Manu and his companions bring life back to the world, and humanity begins a new cycle. The flood in Hindu mythology represents not just a physical rebirth, but also the reconstruction of Dharma, the re-establishment of cosmic order. Vishnu's Matsya avatar, as the protector of this order, once again guides humanity. The flood always symbolizes not just destruction, but also purification and a new opportunity for humanity. This story in Hindu mythology is both a warning and a beacon of hope for humanity. Even when one strays from the right path, there is always a chance for salvation and a new beginning. The story of Noah's flood has been told in different ways in various parts of the world. Each culture has shaped this universal narrative of catastrophe according to its own belief system and worldview. Now, we journey to the Far East, to the mysterious world of Chinese civilization. The flood in Chinese mythology, the hero who restores order. In Chinese mythology, the flood symbolizes the disruption of the world's balance and the reign of chaos. However, in this narrative, we see natural disasters and human will coming to the fore rather than the wrath and punishment of gods, as in other cultures. Yu, one of China's first legendary rulers, faces a great flood. This disaster, lasting for years, has devastated the country and left people in misery. Yu fights against the flood with incredible determination and resolve. After years of work, he brings rivers under control, builds canals and dams, and brings an end to the flood. Yu's success earns him great respect. The people choose him as emperor, and thus China's first dynasty is established. The flood story in Chinese mythology emphasizes the importance of human will and perseverance. Yu overcame the flood without the help of gods, through his own knowledge and effort, and saved his country. This story also demonstrates the importance of building society and order. After the flood, Yu established a new order, proving that people can overcome difficulties by working together. The Chinese flood myth offers a different perspective from narratives of other cultures. In this story, humans are seen as masters of their fate, and even in the face of natural forces, they can achieve victory with determination and knowledge. In world mythologies, the flood is often told as a story of punishment and rebirth. However, in some cultures, the flood carries a deeper meaning. It is an indication of the cyclical structure of the universe, that creation and destruction are in a constant cycle. The flood in Maya and Aztec mythologies, part of the cosmic cycle. For Maya culture, time is not linear but cyclical. The world has been created and destroyed multiple times, and this cycle will continue forever. The end of each cycle comes with a great disaster, and one of these disasters is the flood. The flood cleanses the sins of the old world, purifies the earth, and prepares the ground for a new cycle. The Maya sacred book Popol Vuh tells us how humanity was recreated after the flood. This time, the gods create humans from the corn plant. Corn is both a source of life and a sacred plant for Maya culture. In Aztec mythology, the flood is also part of a similar cosmic cycle. The Aztecs believe that the world has lived through 5 separate ages. Each age ends with a disaster and gives way to a new age. The 4th age ended with a great flood. The gods, angered by the sins of humans, submerged the earth in a flood. However, a couple who survived the flood, Tata and Nina, ensure the continuation of the human race. They hide inside a tree on the instructions of the gods and are protected from the flood. After the flood, Tata and Nina establish a new world and continue the human lineage. The flood narratives in Maya and Aztec mythologies show us the cyclical structure of the universe and that life is in constant change and transformation. The flood is both an end and a beginning, and this cycle will continue forever. These myths also remind us of the power of nature and the fragility of humanity. But at the same time, they give hope. Because after every destruction, a new beginning, a new birth is possible. The flood in Norse mythology, the destructive wave of Ragnarok. Norse mythology is full of complex and impressive stories that tell of the creation and end of the world. In these myths, there is a constant struggle between gods, giants, dwarves, and humans. And the climax of this struggle is the great apocalypse known as Ragnarok. In Norse mythology, the Flood is part of the Ragnarok event. Ragnarok symbolizes the twilight of the gods, the end of the world, and the rebirth of everything. The Flood is one of the most destructive elements of this doomsday scenario. During Ragnarok, the sea serpent Jormungandr emerges from the sea and creates a massive wave that engulfs the entire world. This wave is so large that it submerges the entire world underwater. This flood destroys much of the life on Earth. But this is not the end. After Ragnarok, the world is reborn. A few surviving gods and humans establish a new world and a new order. This new world will be a better and more just world than the old one. The Norse flood myth shows us the cyclical nature of the world and life. Every end is also a beginning, and every destruction offers an opportunity for a new creation. Norse mythology reminds us of both the beauty and ruthlessness of life, and it emphasizes the importance of finding balance between these two. Traces of Noah's flood live not only in written texts but also in oral traditions. In the vast lands of Africa and Oceania, flood stories passed down from generation to generation shed light on humanity's relationship with nature and the gods. The flood in African and Oceanian mythologies, punishment for evil and nature's wrath. In African mythologies, the flood is often described as a punishment resulting from people's evil deeds and disrespect towards the gods. When people violate moral rules, harm nature, or anger the gods, they are punished with a flood. In Yoruba mythology, the gods have given people order and moral rules. However, people forget these rules and turn to greed, violence, and injustice. The gods become angry at this situation and send a flood to cleanse the earth. In the narratives of peoples living along the Nile River, the flood symbolizes the wrath of the river god. When people pollute the sacred waters of the river or disrespect the god, the river overflows and destroys everything. In Oceanian mythologies, the flood is seen as a result of the disruption of nature's balance. When people deplete natural resources, disrespect spiritual beings, or lose their harmony with nature, they face a flood. In Polynesian and Micronesian cultures, floods are usually sent by sea gods. These gods are the protectors of nature and punish the damage that humans do to nature. In Maori culture, the flood symbolizes the wrath of the sea god Tangaroa. Tangaroa becomes angry due to people's overfishing and polluting the seas and punishes them with a great flood. In Hawaiian mythology, the god Cain sends a great flood because of people's sins. Only one person, Niue, survives this flood by building a ship. The flood stories in African and Oceanian mythologies contain important messages about humanity's relationship with nature and the gods. These myths remind us that we must respect the power of nature and adhere to moral values. Because when we live in harmony with nature and remember our moral responsibilities, we can protect both ourselves and the world. The reality of the flood, myth or history. The scientific probability of the flood. What do the evidences say? Flood myths are one of the oldest and most universal narratives in history. But from a scientific perspective, are there archaeological, geological, and geographical evidences supporting the reality of these myths? Let's examine the discoveries made in different regions. Archaeological discoveries. Archaeological excavations in Mesopotamia have presented findings that align with flood myths. Especially excavations carried out in the Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian regions indicate that these myths may be based on a real natural event. In excavations led by Leonard Woolley, a massive flood layer was detected in the Sumerian city of Ur. This flood layer contains clay and mud approximately 2.5 meters thick. In the same period, traces of similar flooding were found in other surrounding settlements. Such findings point to the occurrence of a great flood in the Mesopotamian region. However, whether such findings alone are proof of a global flood is debatable. These discoveries mostly indicate regional flood disasters. Black Sea theory. Some scientists propose the theory that Noah's flood may have occurred in the Black Sea region. According to this theory, the Black Sea was a freshwater lake about 7,500 years ago. But at the end of the last ice age, the rise in sea levels caused water from the Mediterranean to flow through the straits into the Black Sea, leading to a massive flood. Researchers Robert Ballard and William Ryan argue that the Black Sea taking its current form greatly affected the people living in the area, and this event could be commemorated with flood myths in different cultures. Ballard found human settlement remains on the seabed near Sinop and said they were submerged by a great flood. This theory provides a scientific explanation that particularly aligns with regional flood myths. Sea level changes. With the end of the last ice age, major environmental changes occurred worldwide. As a result of global warming, glaciers melted, and significant rises in sea levels occurred. These rises submerged low-lying coastal areas and caused the destruction of settlement areas. Global sea level rises may have laid the groundwork for the emergence of flood stories in many parts of the world. According to geological data, some regions, especially coastlines, experienced major flood disasters during this period. These events may have led to the emergence of flood myths both in Mesopotamia and elsewhere. Where did the flood occur? Global catastrophe or regional disaster. Flood myths have found a place in many cultures around the world, and each culture has interpreted this disaster in line with its own beliefs, geography, and historical memory. While some myths speak of a global flood, others describe a more regional disaster. These differences have led to various debates about the true nature of the flood. Mesopotamian mythology, a regional flood. The Epic of Gilgamesh in Sumerian mythology tells of the gods deciding to destroy humanity because they found humans noisy and disturbing. While the gods decide to destroy humanity with a great flood, the god Enki warns the wise king Ziusidra, Utnapishtim, to build a ship. Ziusidra saves his family, animals, and plants. The flood described in the Epic of Gilgamesh is considered a mythological narrative of a disaster specific to the Mesopotamian region. Archaeological findings also show traces of flood disasters in Mesopotamian cities like Ur. Greek mythology, a regional flood. In Greek mythology, the legend of Deucalion and Pyrrha tells of the gods punishing humans for their moral corruption. Zeus, tired of human wickedness, decides to destroy them with a flood. However, Prometheus's son Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha are warned by the gods and build an ark, thus surviving the flood. This story is considered a mythological reflection of a regional disaster specific to Greek geography. Hindu mythology, a regional flood. In Hindu mythology, the god Vishnu, in his first avatar as Matsya fish form, warns humans about an approaching flood. Manu, a devout king, builds a ship before the flood under Vishnu's guidance. This story describes a flood specific to the Indian region rather than the end of the world and is considered a regional disaster. Chinese and Aztec mythologies, regional floods. In Chinese mythology, the flood is a disaster that occurs as a result of the imbalance of nature. Yu the Great controls the flood disaster by opening new channels, thus ending the flood. This narrative is seen as a mythological interpretation of a great flood disaster experienced in Chinese geography. In Aztec mythology, it is believed that the world lived through 4 ages, each ending with a disaster. The 4th age ended with a great flood, and only one couple, Tata and Nina, survived to continue the human lineage. This myth also symbolizes a regional disaster. Torah, a global flood narrative. The flood narrative in the Torah begins in the book of Genesis with God deciding to destroy the world with a global flood due to human wickedness. God commands Noah to build an ark and save his family and a pair of every kind of animal with this ark. The flood covered the entire world, and the waters continued for 40 days and 40 nights. The narrative in the Torah describes a global disaster where every place in the world was submerged. Bible, a global flood parallel to the Torah. The Bible accepts the flood narrative found in the Old Testament. Noah's flood is a global disaster where God destroys the world with a great flood as a punishment for humanity's sins. According to the biblical narrative, Noah and his family are saved thanks to the ark they built on God's command. This narrative parallels the Torah and indicates a global flood. Quran, a regional flood. In the Quran, the narrative of Noah's flood appears in various surahs such as Surah Nuh and Surah Hud. In the Quran, the flood is described as a divine punishment given to Noah's people, but the event is portrayed more as a regional disaster. Noah's people were punished with the flood by Allah because they continued moral corruption despite warnings. The flood described in the Quran represents a more regional event as a punishment given to Noah's people rather than a global disaster covering the entire world. Scientific data, global or regional. Scientific research does not provide evidence for a large-scale global flood. Geological data show that regional disasters occurred during periods when sea levels rose globally. However, no definitive evidence has been found that a global flood submerged everywhere around the world. Black Sea theory. Scientists suggest that the Black Sea was a freshwater lake about 7,500 years ago, and waters from the Mediterranean caused a massive flood in the Black Sea basin, leading to the destruction of settlements in this region. This theory has been associated with Noah's flood by some researchers. However, this event is considered more of a regional disaster. Flood layers in Mesopotamia. Some archaeological findings in Mesopotamia bear traces of great flood disasters. Flood layers found in excavations in cities like Ur may be the source of great flood myths in this region. Post-Ice Age sea level rise. With the end of the last ice age, global warming caused sea levels to rise, leading to great flood disasters in coastal regions. These events may have been influential in the birth of various flood myths. Views on the non-occurrence of the flood, the power of myths. Flood myths carry deep symbolic meanings in many cultures. However, some researchers argue that these stories are not based on a real event, but rather are a reflection of human nature and the psychological and moral needs of societies. According to this view, flood myths are actually one of the ways humans cope with the difficulties they face in life, natural events, and existential fears. Symbolic narratives. Many researchers who think that flood myths are symbolic narratives rather than real events suggest that these stories represent human fragility and helplessness in the face of nature. Especially ancient societies may have developed such myths to make sense of the natural disasters, floods, and other destructive events they experienced. These disasters made them feel the insecurity of their lives and how delicate the balances in the world are. Human struggle against nature. Human helplessness in the face of natural events is one of the most prominent themes in flood myths. Large water floods, and natural disasters could be fatal for agricultural societies. Therefore, flood myths are not just a story of a disaster, but a warning about the uncontrollable power of nature and human fragility in the face of this power. Sense of guilt and desire for a fresh start. In many flood myths, humans are punished for their moral decay or sins against the gods. These myths express communities' collective feelings of guilt and desire for purification from wrongdoings. Floods offer an opportunity for purification from the evils of the old world, a moral rebirth, and a better beginning. Therefore, flood myths can be understood not only as an account of past sins, but also as a symbol of hope and purification. Psychological reflection. From a psychological perspective, flood myths symbolize people's inner fears, feelings of guilt, and subconscious anxieties. For example, modern psychologists argue that humans may create myths to cope with great disasters in situations where they feel inadequate, guilty, or experiencing moral decay. Flood myths may be an expression of such emotional and psychological processes. Narrative of social and moral values. According to this view, flood myths aim to reflect the common moral values of a community. Societies may have used flood myths to show their individuals the right path and teach them to obey moral rules. The wrath of the gods and the threat of disaster become powerful symbols aimed at ensuring individuals adhere to social norms and preserve moral values. Collective consciousness and archetypes. Flood myths can also be associated with Carl Jung's concepts of collective unconscious and archetype. Jung argued that there are some common symbols and stories shared by all humanity. Flood myths can be seen as one of these archetypes. It can be understood as a symbol expressing humanity's universal fears, desire for rebirth and purification. Cultural context of flood myths. Flood myths told in different cultures can also be associated with the geographical and environmental conditions in which societies live. For example, the prevalence of flood myths in regions such as Mesopotamia, where river floods were frequent, suggests that these myths are symbolic narratives inspired by natural events. Similarly, flood stories in Greek and Hindu mythologies symbolize these societies' relationship with nature and their struggle for life. Quranic, Torah, and biblical perspective. From a religious point of view, while Noah's flood described in the Torah and the Bible is considered a global catastrophe, the Quran treats this event more as a regional disaster. All three texts deal with the flood within the framework of human moral decay and God's justice. However, symbolic interpretations point out that the stories in these texts are powerful narratives aimed at reminding people of their responsibilities to God. According to this perspective, flood myths may be symbolic narratives used to shape humanity's moral and ethical values rather than a real event. Conspiracy theories about Noah's flood, ancient aliens, and the Anunnaki theory. Writers like Zecharia Sitchin and Eric von Daniken claim that many myths in human history are actually memories of visits by extraterrestrial beings. According to Sitchin's theory, the Anunnaki mentioned in Sumerian tablets are aliens from a planet called Nibiru, and they genetically manipulated humanity. In this theory, Noah's flood is seen as a tool used by the Anunnaki to reduce the human population that had gotten out of control. Daniken, on the other hand, argues that the advanced structures and technologies of ancient civilizations can be explained by alien intervention, and he views Noah's flood as part of this intervention. However, these theories are rejected by academic circles, as they are based on misinterpretations of Sumerian texts. Sumerologists emphasize that the Anunnaki are mythological gods, not an alien race as claimed by Sitchin and Daniken. Additionally, there is no scientific evidence for the existence of the planet Nibiru. The flood, in the light of legend, history, and science, humanity's shared memory. Noah's flood. A story that has fascinated, frightened, and inspired humanity for thousands of years. This story is not just a legend, but a mystery where history, culture, and belief intertwine. To understand the flood story, we must embark on a journey in the light of legends, historical facts, and scientific discoveries. The myth of Noah's flood appears in cultures all around the world. In the holy books of the Abrahamic religions, the Torah, Bible, and Quran, the flood is described as a result of humanity's moral downfall and God's wrath. Similar stories can also be found in Sumerian, Babylonian, Greek, Chinese, Maya, and Aztec mythologies. The widespread nature of this myth may reflect a common fear shared by humanity or perhaps a collective memory of an event that occurred in the past. Historical records show that great flood disasters occurred in the Mesopotamian region. These disasters could have been devastating for agricultural societies and left deep marks in collective memory. The scientific world finds the possibility of a global flood to be weak. However, it is believed that regional disasters and climate changes may have played a significant role in the formation of flood myths. The story of Noah's flood is a mirror that reflects humanity's deepest fears and hopes. This story reminds us of our past and also makes us reflect on our future. The echoes of the flood myth continue to affect humanity for thousands of years. The uncontrollable power of nature, human vulnerability, and renewing hope. These universal themes come together in the flood myth. So, what does this story tell you? What universal themes does the flood illuminate for you? How do you interpret our relationship with nature, the future of humanity, and the power of this story? Share your thoughts with us. Write in the comments what this myth made you think about. If this content inspired you, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Also, make sure to turn on notifications to stay updated on our new videos. See you on the next mysterious journey.